My son's voice came through the phone like a slap. "We're married now, Mom. Send the keys to the lake house in Vermont. Right now." No hello? No how are you? No apology for keeping his own wedding a secret from the one person who had wiped his tears, bandaged his knees, and held his hand through every storm of his 34 years. I stood frozen in the kitchen of the house that had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, then me. 3 generations of women who had painted these walls with laughter and grief, and the smell of pine drifting in from the water. The same lake that had cradled my husband's ashes 6 years ago now lapped quietly outside the window, a soft, rhythmic hush that sounded almost like breathing, while my only child demanded the only place on earth that still felt like home. My hand tightened around the phone until the edges bit into my palm. The morning light was thin and gray, the kind of late summer light that makes everything look a little bruised. I could smell coffee cooling in the pot, and the faint sweetness of the wild blackberries that grew along the driveway. Sent memories that suddenly felt fragile, like they could be stolen with a single careless signature. "Gavin," I said, and my voice came out steadier than the tremor in my chest. "You got married?" "Yeah, yesterday. Harper wants to spend our honeymoon at the lake house. We leave tomorrow. Keys, Mom. Today." Harper, a name I had never heard. A woman who was suddenly my daughter-in-law and already claiming the house my grandmother bought with the money from her first best-selling novel, the house where Gavin learned to swim in water so cold it stole his breath, where we scattered Mark's ashes under the birches while the wind carried pieces of him out over the waves, where every summer the loons call at dusk like they're mourning something beautiful and irreplaceable. I closed my eyes and felt the years collapse into that single moment. The weight of every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every proud tear at graduation pressing against my ribs. How do you measure a lifetime of love against one careless sentence? "I didn't even know you were dating anyone seriously." My throat ached with the words I didn't say. I would have dropped everything to meet her. I would have opened my heart the way I open this house every July. It was fast, perfect. "Look, she's got a book tour coming up in the fall. This is our only window. The lake house is empty anyway." Empty. The word landed like a stone in still water. Empty, as if memories don't fill rooms. As if the echo of my husband laughing on the dock while Gavin tried to catch fireflies in a mason jar was nothing more than vacant square footage. If my story broke your heart the way his words broke mine, please subscribe to the channel right now. There are more stories like this, raw, painful, and ultimately about choosing yourself, and I don't want you to miss the next one. Stay with me. I took a breath that tasted like lake water and pine needles, and the metallic edge of fear. "Gavin, I haven't met Harper. Why don't you both come up this weekend? We'll open the house together, celebrate properly." "Mom, there's no time. She's already packing. Just FedEx the keys." The entitlement in his voice was new and familiar all at once. Like the 7-year-old who once screamed because I wouldn't let him open all his Christmas presents on Christmas Eve. Some things never really change. They just grow taller and learn better vocabulary. I pressed my free hand flat against the cool window grass, grounding myself in the chill. Outside, a loon drifted across the silver water, its cry rising and falling like a warning. "Gavin, your cousins are coming up with the kids in 10 days. It's the week we've done every July since you were 4. They can stay somewhere else. Harper needs peace to write." Peace. In my sanctuary? The one place I still go when the silence in the city house gets too loud, when the bed feels too big, and Mark's side stays cold no matter how many quilts I pile on. I looked out at the water, silver in the late morning light, and felt something inside me snap. Not with anger, but with clarity. A cold, bright line drawn in the sand. "I need to think about it," I said. And the words tasted like steel. "There's nothing to think about. It's a family house. I'm family." Yes, I thought, my heart cracking open like thin ice. You are, and that's exactly why this hurts so much. I hung up before he could argue further, set the phone down like it was something poisonous, and stood there listening to the quiet tick of the old wall clock my grandmother brought from Ireland. The same clock that counted down Mark's last days, the same clock that would still be ticking long after I was gone.
Then I made 2 calls, one to David Lang, the private investigator who had once quietly handled a stalking situation for a writer friend of mine, the other to Allison Pierce, my estate attorney. Because if my son and his brand new wife wanted the keys to my soul, they were going to get something else entirely. 3 days later, I had a thick, cream-colored box tied with forest green ribbon delivered to Gavin's condo in Boston. Inside was not the key to the lake house. Inside was the truth. If you've ever been blindsided by the people you love most, you know that first phone call feels like drowning. I was 66 years old, widowed, and suddenly the villain in my own son's love story. But I wasn't going to hand over the house my grandmother called the last honest place in America without knowing exactly who Harper really was. David's preliminary report came faster than I expected, and I read it sitting on the dock at dusk, the pages trembling slightly in the breeze that smelled of coming autumn. Harper Reynolds, real name Haley Parker, born in a dying mill town in northern Maine, changed her name at 23 after her first short story won a regional contest. Minimal publishing credits, a few pieces in literary magazines no one reads, one self-published novel that sold 312 copies. But her romantic history? That was the masterpiece. Professor Malcolm Grant, 58, chair of the MFA program that accepted her after one coffee meeting, literary agent Simon Vale, who signed her the week they started sleeping together and dropped her the month her option book flopped. Each man older, established, useful, each relationship ending the moment the usefulness expired. I closed my eyes and felt the old ache of recognition. Men who thought they were choosing love when they were only being chosen for leverage. I had watched friends fall into that trap. I had never imagined my son would. And the lake house? Haley/Harper had asked about it by name at a writer's retreat I hosted 2 years ago, one I didn't attend because I was sitting beside Mark's hospital bed, holding his hand while machines beeped their slow goodbye. Multiple witnesses remembered her cornering guests, asking who owned the famous Adler Lake House, how much it might be worth, whether the family ever considered selling. She had studied us the way a hunter studies tracks in the snow. David's surveillance photos showed her lunching with commercial developers who specialized in turning historic waterfront homes into boutique inns. One spreadsheet, recovered from an unsecured cloud folder, laid it out plainly. Projected revenue for the Adler Inn, a literary retreat, $18.4 million first 5 years. Consulting fee to H upon successful acquisition, $850,000. The final piece was a recorded conversation between Harper and her oldest friend, Tess, obtained in a public cafe in Portland. I listened to it twice on the dock, the loons calling mournfully in the background, like they already knew. "She's 66, Tess. How much longer is the old bat going to cling to that house? Gavin's an only child. It's simple math. And if she won't hand over the keys for the honeymoon, then we get married fast, get inside, start working on him. Men like Gavin fold the moment you think you're carrying their future." I sat there long after the recording ended, the cold seeping through my sweater, tears sliding hot down my cheeks and falling onto the weathered boards beneath me. Not for the house, for my boy, for the gentle, sensitive child who once cried when we found a dead loon tangled in fishing line, who used to fall asleep on my lap while Mark read him Treasure Island by flashlight. When had he become someone who could be bought by flattery and the promise of being someone's hero? I read the transcript once more by lantern light, then called Allison and made the Lake House Trust irreversible, title passing directly to my nieces upon my death, with my sister Rebecca as trustee until they turned 35. No sale, no commercial development, ever. The wedding gift I sent contained the trust documents, the full investigator's report, the photos, the transcripts, and a letter in my own handwriting, written with the fountain pen Mark gave me the year Gavin was born. Gavin, this house is not bricks and cedar shingles. It is every summer you learned that stories matter more than things. It is every night your father read to you on the dock while fireflies blinked like punctuation marks. It is the place your children, should you ever have them with someone who loves you, not your inheritance, will learn the same. I protected it the only way I still can. I hope one day you understand. Love always, Mom. I signed it with the same pen my grandmother used to sign her first royalty check, my hand shaking only a little.
The explosion came at 8:17 p.m. I was in the kitchen, slicing tomatoes for supper, the knife moving slow and deliberate through the soft wed flesh, when my phone lit up with Gavin's name. I wiped my hands on the dish towel that still smelled faintly of Mark's aftershave. He used to steal my towels, and I never had the heart to tell him, and let it ring 3 times. I steadied my breathing the way Mark taught me before every book reading, squared my shoulders, and answered. "What the hell is this?" His voice cracked like ice on the lake in March, raw and splintering. In the background, Harper was shrieking, something about lawsuits, something about me being a controlling bitch, glass shattering against hardwood. "I sent a wedding gift," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "You destroyed my marriage." "No, Gavin. She did that herself the moment she decided you were a stepping stone instead of a human being." Harper grabbed the phone. I heard the snatch of breath, the rustle of fabric, then her voice, syrupy venom that made my skin crawl. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Eleanor? Hiding behind your little investigator and your trust fund walls. That house will be mine, one way or another." I looked out the window at the dark water, the moon just beginning to rise, and felt a cold, fierce calm settle over me. "Over my dead body," I answered, quiet enough that she had to strain to hear, and I meant every word. Gavin came back on the line, breathing hard, like he'd been running. "You cut me out, completely. I protected what my grandmother built, what your father and I preserved, what your cousins deserve to inherit untouched. You still have a home here, Gavin. Always. But not with someone who sees it as real estate." Silence stretched between us, thick with everything we weren't saying. I could hear Harper sobbing in the background now, the sound theatrical and hollow. Then the line went dead. I poured myself a small glass of the bourbon Mark kept in the study, his emergency supply, he used to joke, and walked out onto the dock. The water was black glass under the moon, reflecting a sky full of stars that felt impossibly far away. Somewhere out there, loons were calling to each other. Lonely, haunting, honest. I raised my glass to the dark. Your move, kids. The first small victory came 2 days later. Gavin texted at 2:14 a.m., a time I remembered well from his college years when pride finally lost to need. "Mom, can we talk? Alone?" I was awake anyway, sitting in the old Adirondack chair with a quilt around my shoulders, watching the moon slide across the water. I answered immediately. "Doc, sunrise. Bring coffee." He arrived at 5:47, the sky still more night than morning, looking like he hadn't slept since the package. Hair unwashed, eyes red and swollen, the collar of his jacket turned up against the chill. He handed me a paper cup from the only place open that early in town, bitter diner coffee that tasted like comfort, and sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling above the water the way he did when he was 10 and heartbroken over his first lost Little League game. We didn't speak for a long time, just watched the mist burn off the lake in slow, ghostly curls, listened to the first cautious birds begin their morning conversation. Finally he said, voice raw and scraped thin, "Is it all true?" "Every word." He pulled out his phone with fingers that trembled just slightly.
opened the audio files I'd included on a thumb drive labeled, "Listen when you're ready to hear her real voice." He pressed play.
Harper's voice filled the quiet morning, bright and cruel. Gavin's so desperate to be the hero in someone's story, he never notices when he's just the wallet. He stopped it after 30 seconds, closed his eyes so tightly the skin around them went white. When he opened them, they were wet, reflecting the first pale streak of sunrise. "I'm an idiot." "You're my son," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word, despite my best effort. "And you're hurting. That doesn't make you an idiot. It makes you human." He leaned his head on my shoulder the way he hadn't since he was small enough to fit there, and for a moment the years folded away, and he was simply my little boy again, needing his mother to make the hurting stop. I wrapped my arm around him and felt the tremor running through his whole body. "What do I do now?" he whispered, the question muffled against my sweater. "You decide what kind of man you want to be when the sun comes up tomorrow." He stayed until the sky turned rose gold and the loons began their morning chorus. Then he hugged me, really hugged me, arms tight around my back like he was afraid I'd vanish, and left without another word. I watched his taillights disappear down the dirt road, red eyes in the half-light, and felt the first real breath I'd taken in a week. That was the small turn, the moment I got my son back, even if only for a sunrise. Harper did not go quietly. She showed up at the lake house 2 days later in a white Jeep that looked rented for the aesthetic, tires crunching loud on the gravel like she wanted the whole lake to know she had arrived. The morning was crisp, the kind of September day that smells like wood smoke and regret. Hair perfect, smile sharp as winter air, sunglasses hiding eyes I already knew were calculating every angle. She marched up the porch steps like she already owned the place, heels clicking in aggressive rhythm against the worn pine boards my grandfather had laid himself. I met her at the door with a cup of tea steaming in my hands and zero welcome in my heart. "Eleanor," she began, voice dripping honey thick enough to choke on, "we got off on the wrong foot. I just want us to be family." Families don't forge medical powers of attorney claiming senility. Families don't hire actresses to pretend to be long-lost relatives. Families don't threaten tabloid scandals about dead grandmothers who never existed. You're many things, Harper. Family isn't one of them. Her mask slipped for half a second, pure rage flashing across her face like heat lightning, then snapped back into place, smile tightening until it looked painful. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do." I set my cup down on the railing with deliberate care. "Hallie Parker, born 1994, changed name 2017, defaulted on student loans 2019, currently 3 months behind on the lease for a 1-bedroom in Portsmouth. I know exactly who I'm dealing with." She opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time, she looked young and cornered. The wind off the lake lifted her hair and carried the scent of her expensive perfume straight into my face, something sharp and synthetic that didn't belong here. "Leave my son alone," I said softly, stepping forward until we were close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet my eyes. "Sign the annulment papers Allison will deliver tomorrow. Walk away with whatever dignity you have left, or I hand everything to the New Hampshire Attorney General and let 12 jurors decide how many years fraud is worth." She stared at me for a long moment, the mask finally crumbling completely, then spun on her heel, got back in the Jeep, and left a spray of gravel in her wake that pinged against the porch like gunfire. I stood there long after the dust settled, breathing in pine and lake water and the faint, lingering trace of her perfume that the wind was already carrying away.
I never saw her again.
The climax came 3 weeks later. Gavin filed for annulment, citing fraud. Harper fought at first, threatened tell-alls, leaked texts, the usual arsenal of someone who mistakes noise for power. Then the prosecutor's office opened an investigation into the forged power of attorney documents and the hired illegitimate cousin scheme. Her lawyer suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts. The annulment went through uncontested. She got nothing. Not the house, not Gavin, not even a footnote in our story. 6 months later. The lake was frozen solid, moonlight glittering off the ice like scattered diamonds. I sat on the dock, wrapped in the old wool blanket my grandmother knitted the winter I was born, the one with the uneven stripes she never quite mastered. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but it was a clean hurt, the kind that reminds you you're alive. Gavin pulled up in his truck. New, smaller, no longer screaming for attention, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa spiked with peppermint schnapps, the way Mark always made it when the first hard freeze came. The steam rose between us like incense. He sat beside me without asking, shoulder to shoulder the way we used to when he was little and the world still felt safe. We drank in silence for a while, watching our breath cloud and vanish. I started therapy, he said, voice low, almost lost under the creak of the ice. I know. I hate that you were right. I hate that I had to be. He laughed, a real laugh. Resty at first, but warming up, the kind that used to echo across this water when he was 8 and thought he could skip stones better than his dad. I wrote something, he said, pulling a leathered journal from his coat, the cover worn soft from handling. For the girls, your nieces, so they'll know the house isn't just a house, it's us. He handed it to me, fingers brushing mine, both of us cold but not pulling away. On the first page, in his careful handwriting that hadn't changed since high school, to Mom, who taught me that some doors you don't open with keys, you open them with truth. I traced the words with cold fingers, tears blurring the ink until the letters swam. It's perfect. I want to bring them here every summer, he said, voice rough with everything he wasn't saying. Teach them the loon call, let them scatter my ashes under the same birches someday, if that's okay. I rested my head on his shoulder, felt the solid warmth of him through 2 coats and 34 years of history. It's more than okay.